the galaxy was not always here. Once there was no universe, there was simply nothingness. Until, at some point, that nothingness was cleaved open by someone with an axe, with an edge thinner than an atom. But it was still an axe. Debris went everywhere. And this person, they shouldered their axe, and they looked at this nothingness and the debris, and they knew it was not quite right. They could not make themselves leave it as it was. So with their axe, they made parts of themselves into stars, and put these stars one at a time in the nothingness. These mando'ade, they looked up at this first star, and they called them Buir, and that is why we call this particular deity Buir. Now, these mando'ade ran this way and that in the nothingness, and they grouped together, and they made galaxies of themselves. And then they gathered as much debris as they could of the nothingness, and they made that debris into planets. Planets and nebulas and all sorts of things around them. They grew and they had children of their own. And slowly these planets started to gain life. From the smallest cells up. And then one day, Buir gathered their children and said, "This is still not quite right. I cannot leave this as it is. I am going to wander about you, and make things better." So Buir set off to wander the stars, and tweak and fix things to make things better, to make things a little more right. Eventually, sentient life came about, different species all over, and on Coruscant there were the Taung. And eventually they decided that they must leave, because their siblings on this planet, the humans, and they just were not quite getting along anymore. So they knew they must leave. And their mando'ade, the gods of their system, said, "We cannot go with you, and we cannot guide you. You need Buir to guide you." And so the Taung and their mando'ade, who would no longer be their mando'ade, called for Buir, and Buir came. And Buir listened to what they wanted and what they needed, and said, "Well, follow me." So they guided them through the stars to Mandalore. And that is why we also call them Bes'kar. There, the Taung became mando'ade. They became the Mandalorians. And they discovered that on Mandalore, and on Concordia too, that nearby moon, that there was a new kind of base of steel that was so like Buir's axe. It was so strong that it could take such a fine point, and while it could not cleave open the nothingness of space and time, Buir's axe was dull at this point, and it also could no longer cleave through space and time, and they refused to sharpen it again yet. And it was so like Buir's axe that they decided to call it Bes'kar, star steel. And for a while, the mando'ade, they used Bes'kar. And then they became curious. What makes this base, what makes this steel so much like Buir's axe? And they figured out through trial and error that if they took normal steel and various minerals that they do not tell the Aurutise about, and still to this day, it is anathema to being Mandalorian to tell the Aurutise about these minerals. It would make one Dharmanda. They found that if they combine the normal Bes and these minerals in a specific way, they can create more Bes'kar. And so that is why Bes'kar is both ore and craft. But they knew. Because it is like Karabur's axe, and Karabur is the one that led them to this planet, this system that had this Bes'kar, this star steel. So that is why the Gorane ask Karabur to bless every piece of Bes'kar they work or smelt. And we do this even today, when we no longer worship the gods as we once did. We no longer worship the god Ade as we once did. And despite that, I think the god Ade are still among us. And knowing that, thinking that, Karabur must still wander the stars, tweaking things and making changes, all because they have decided that it is still not quite right.